What is up, Fixler here for Thomann synthesizers. And recently I've spent a lot of time creating my own library of complex processed drum loops that I synthesize myself and then further process. Why? Because I think it's useful whenever I want to make music to already have a bunch of material that's ready to go that I just have to slice up and, I don't know, maybe grab 3 or 4 different pre-processed drum loops with a bit more nuance and detail and texture to them, so that I can just take slices out of them to create interesting beats fairly quickly. So today I'm going to show you some of my process, and we're starting out with the LXR-02 by Erica Synths, which is great for creating super basic, not so complex drum sounds that are going to be great source material for further processing. Alright, let's go.
Alright, here we go. The LXR-02 by Erica Synths and Sonic Potions. This is an all-digital drum machine, and as you can see it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 individual sounds, each with their own volume fader. And here this master volume fader. And yeah, this is going to allow us to create some very basic drum sounds using the basic principles of drum synthesis. So I'm just going to basically program a pattern here, because you're going to find all of the rest of the information in another video. Alright, as you can hear, there's already some complexity going on because we have this little bit crushing effect here. And the great thing about the LXR is that each of the tracks has its own sample rate reduction, bit crushing kind of setting here. And changing it changes the pitch of this little distortion, which basically allows you to almost write melodies, bit crushing melodies on top of your drum sounds. And by the way, in case you're wondering, this is also going through an Echoplex preamp to boost it and saturate it, and afterwards it's going through my Mackie mixing desk where it's further distorted, but also very subtly, just to create some analog details here to make the sound a bit more grounded. Alright, I guess that's it already for this very basic drum loop. And you might have noticed that I've chosen pretty short decay times for all of the sounds, because I think usually that makes it easier to do a lot of complex effects afterwards. If you have a little space between each of the impacts, but it can also be beneficial if some sounds overlap. If you later slice it, you're gonna get interesting complex slices if they don't just consist of one drum sound, but maybe like a hi-hat overlapping into the next drum sound, and you can use this as a slice and it's gonna have a more complex character. As if there was no other drum sound overlapping with it. But especially for the lower, bigger drums like the kick drum and the tom, I choose, and also the snare, I choose fairly short decay times. Alright, so here we are. And what did I prepare here? As you can see on this first track, I have not only the loop that we just created, but also a whole bunch of other loops that are already recorded from the LXR. And they are still dry. So here's our loop again. And what I have here is one resampling track. So whatever I'm going to do here with these effects, I can resample to basically consolidate it into a new audio file here. And then here I have just another resampling track. So what I could do is resample something onto this track, and then maybe even put this through another effect chain to then process it on to this second resampling track. Or I could build one effects chain, re-record all of these loops to this channel, and then create another effect chain and re-record all of the loops to this channel. But first let's have a look at
what I'm going to do here. And let me explain each of these plugins that are loaded here. This is just a utility allowing me to do volume adjustments and manipulate the stereo width and all of these basic utility things. So nothing special here. Here is a side widener. This is basically a stereo widening tool. With headphones, you're going to notice the difference from this mono signal to this additional side signal. So this just creates mono-compatible side stereo field information from the basic mono recording. Why is this beneficial? You could always, in the end, just erase it again by using another utility in the end and putting the width to 0%. And then you would have a clean mono signal again. But this is just going to throw some more information out there into the sides. Also, by the way, side widener, it's not so expensive and it's my favorite side widening tool I've tried so far. So, big recommendation. Anyways, up next, and now is where it gets interesting to create some more complexity. What I have here are two multi-effects plugins. RC-20, which some of you already know is one of my favorites to create analog type artifacts like tape, noise, vinyl noise, fluctuating distortion, bit crushing, and all sort of vintage type artifacts. And here my next big recommendation is Infiltrator by Devious Machines. DJ Swagger actually suggested that I check this out, and it's so powerful. Let me explain the basic layout. You have here 10 slots basically, and on each of these slots you can load one of these many effects. These are just regular old effects like reverb, delay, distortion, beat repeats, all sort of stuff. Typical effects that you know. And then you can layer up to 10 of these in these various slots. And what's pretty insane is that it even has a sequencer, so you can even sequence at which moment which of these 10 effects should be activated. Just to demonstrate it to you, let's have a look at a fairly complex factory preset here and then do the A/B comparison just to showcase the possibilities of this insane plugin. So here you can see that it maxed out all of these 10 slots. So we have 10 effects, and here in the sequencer you can see at which moment in the sequence each of these effects is going to be turned on. And now let's first listen to the dry signal. And now let's turn on the effect. Yeah, and now we get some instant IDM vibes. I think here's also some references. I think this one's called Licking Windows, obviously. A little nod to Window Licker by FX Twin. You get the idea. Obviously, those are just presets, but if you were to create your own presets here, you basically have endless possibilities. One thing that I usually use here, which might be our first idea here for the processing, is to create an initial preset. And what I always like with drum sounds, if they are electronic, to make them even more artificial and metallic. And a great tool is this effect here called Comp, which is basically a filter curve that you can see here. This is a little representation of the spectrum. So let's first listen to the signal and then move this cutoff frequency around. And you can see here what it does to the sound. It basically sounds like a flanger or phaser, something like this, just by cone filtering, basically, I think it's called, by taking something from the signal, taking some frequencies out and lowering them. But if we increase the resonance, we can also create these peaks that go above the baseline volume. So, and what we could do now is obviously to draw in this little automation here. And then we can also decide how fast or how slow it should move. And here the range, basically. And I just want some subtle movement in here. And here we also have a mix knob, obviously. So now already we have a beautiful metallic, futuristic, artificial kind of aesthetic here that I really like. And now if we'd liked, we could also, I don't know, let's choose a delay here for the second slot. And now let's start the sequencer here and say we want this on every beat, this first effect. And the delay only on the last one. Okay, this is not very spectacular, but you get the idea, all right? And you could spend hours just creating one of these presets. But for now, I think this kind of metallic sound here from the flanger type effect here, this comp filter, is actually all that I need for now. Now let's add some further complexity with RC-20, which also is a multi-effects plugin. And of course, it goes without saying, actually, whatever Infiltrator does, you could theoretically also do with stock plugins enabled, and it would just be much more complicated. But theoretically, you could do all of this. And listening to some of these presets and then reconsidering what artists like Aphex Twin or Tecra, etc. did in the 1990s without this plugin is actually completely insane. Because if you listen to the music, a lot of this stuff is something that would happen in their music, but with so much more limited tools, they came up with these hyper complex effect chains and automations. It's completely insane. Anyways, getting carried away here. Let's try and see what we can do with RC-20. The basic layout is clear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 effects here that we can utilize to make everything sound a bit more vintage, a bit more analog, and add additional artifacts into the sound. Starting out here with this noise. And the great thing here is, this is basically the noise that I selected. There's various other noise sources here. I like the 15-inch tape hiss. And the great thing is that it has an envelope follower. Now this is obviously exaggerated, but you can hear that the noise is now following the envelope of the incoming audio signal. But I just want to have it in a super subtle way here. Barely even noticeable, but it's a beautiful detail. Then here wobble basically introduces pitch fluctuation, like you would encounter on an old cassette deck or a tape recorder. And with this dry wet knob you can also achieve tape flanging. But I just want some super subtle fluctuation, also barely noticeable. Now let's add some analog type distortion. And the great thing here about this plugin is that all of these effects have this fluctuation knob here. I already mentioned this in a previous video, but in case you didn't know, this basically introduces random fluctuation for each of these presets, for each of these effects. So now we have a distortion that's going to be constant. But once I start to activate the fluctuation, it's going to change over time, randomly. Now this is also very exaggerated, but I'm just going to add it in here in a much more subtle way and with a bit of dry signal. And now we have some super subtle overtones in the background that are not constantly there, but they're fluctuating all the time. This right here might maybe be my favorite part of RC-20, the bit crusher, which also has a fluctuation here. So let's check out how this sounds. Now let's add in fluctuation and then play around with the dry wet. Lovely. Now we have this bit crushing sound on the top that is constantly evolving. And now here we have a basic reverb. I just want to create some super subtle space in the background here, making it a bit more three-dimensional room here. And then lastly, this could be used to simulate a tape that's very worn out, but I don't want to use it right now. But it's also pretty beautiful, especially for pads. Not so much for drums, I think. Anyways, up next here, compressor, just to compress everything a bit, very drastically, like this, but then only mix it in a super subtle way to bring up some of these details between the beats. And then lastly here, another tape simulation by Softtube. This basically just lets me create some subtle overtones again and introduce a bit of subtle noise here. You can also play around with the tape speed, which is gonna influence the equalization curve, I think, and the noise ratio. And here also we could introduce tape flanging by playing around with the dry wet knob. And I think this is now a super interesting loop. So I guess I'm gonna resample it here. And voila, now I have a super complex, interesting, unique sounding drum loop that is not just your typical 808 sound or whatever. And what I would do with these now is to consolidate it basically like this. And this is something now, this loop is something that I would feed into my Octa track, put it to my sample library, and the next time that I would want to make a track, I wouldn't have to design all of my drum sounds from scratch, but I would already have this library of loops, and all I'd have to do is to basically just grab a bunch of these loops, slice them, rearrange them to build a beat. And this way I already have some super complex, interesting drum sounds with overlap also. So for example, if I would just take this slice here and work with it in a beat, I would have overlapping drum sounds that are even more complex, as though I would just work with a regular 808 or 909 kit. And now what I could do, obviously, is to just take all of these loops here, resample them through this effect chain, and it's that easy. And then I could do this for all of these loops, and then afterwards create a new effect chain and do it all over again. You get the idea. And yeah, you see how easy it is and how quick it goes now that I have an effect chain that I'm happy with. And then obviously I could even use this second channel here, put a whole new effect chain on top of this channel, and then do the same process, giving me even more complex sounds. But I guess that's it for now. You get the basic idea. This is my workflow for creating complex, interesting drum sounds.
All right, I guess that's it from my side for today. As usual, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I'm trying to get back to you ASAP. And apart from that, thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Peace out.